Right. Well, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, and that is Dr. David Hancock. So let me just share my screen here. Right, so Dr. David Hancock is with the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, which is part of the Cabinet Office. And he's been there just shy of 6 years, reporting to the Treasury as the government's senior construction advisor. His LinkedIn profile tells me that he's a board member of the Buckingham Palace Refurb, British Antarctic Survey, BVI Recovery and Development Agency, a visiting fellow with Cranfield University. And before that, he was formerly head of functional leadership and risk for TfL, and before that, a board director at Halcro. David holds a degree in engineering from the University of Nottingham and an MBA from the University of Bath. David, it's a pleasure to have you here, an honor, and thank you for making yourself available to present to us today.
Thank you, Phil. Can everybody see me? I have a nice picture of somebody else, but can everybody see me?
Yes, we can see you fine, David. Yes, you're
okay.
Thursday.
It's always a bit worrying when you can't see your audience. So thank you. As was pointed out, this is about the future of construction and where we as government see the future of construction going. You'll be aware that the Prime Minister has said build, build, build. The Chancellor has said that infrastructure and construction are the way out of this crisis. And so there's a great future for construction, but with some caveats. So, you know, traditionally we have an industry that is very poor on increased productivity. Let's put it that way. I think since about 2010, the increase in productivity has been about 0.19%, which is pretty poor when you look at manufacturing, all the things that Glenn was talking to in Bentley and IT. We still do most of our construction in a very traditional way. Our productivity is low, therefore there's low sets of investment in it. It's fragmented. We have about 330,000 SMEs that make it up that are around about 2 to 3 people. And we've had some pretty horrific areas of poor delivery. 2 areas that I deal very closely with, Crossrail, as you know, is still late and over budget from what the project we were expecting. And then I'm involved in the ACM cladding project, which is looking at taking off all of the cladding we put on the buildings under the Green Deal to make them more energy efficient, which following the Grenfell tragedy, we found out are really not safe for the people living in the building. So on the background of that, we're turning around and saying, well, we need to spend between 27 to 39 billion pounds on construction. If you look at the detailed analysis is in the National Infrastructure Commission pipeline, which we produced June of this year. But to give you some idea about what we are going to invest, we're in the, about, let me just make sure I get the figures right here. So we're looking at a 10-year rebuild program in schools. First 50 schools will be supported by over £1 billion of funding. And it's going to be the refurbishment and building will be targeted at those worst affected and in the worst condition schools. We're looking at levelling out across the country. So the North and the Midlands are part of the Prime Minister's plans to level up. We're looking at between 560 and 200 million pounds for FE colleges and schools. You will have heard the Prime Minister talking about the 10,000 prison places. That equates to roughly 4 brand new prisons. We already are finishing one off in Wellingborough, one on in Glenparva, and we're looking to schedule a few more to open this year. Hospitals. The Health and Social Care Secretary, Matt Hancock, announced that we're going to build new hospitals. We're going to modernise our primary care estate, and we're going to invest in new diagnostics and technology. So we're talking about around £2.8 billion for 6 new hospitals. That follows on 1.8 billion of capital funding. And then we're looking still to get 300,000 homes a year built. We have roads and the rail upgrade to go on. So you can see a vast amount of money that could, if we're not careful, be put into an industry that is poor in its productivity, not good at collaborating, and not very digitally enhanced. So what are we asking for that money? So we're saying we'll invest in you. And what we'd like to see is we'd like to see the digitization of assets. We'd like to go on from BIM level 2. You've seen some of the stuff that Glenn talked about of being able to look at how we can categorize our assets, how we can put them into folders. We'd like to see a move towards what Digital Built Britain are calling digital twins. We'd like to see digital twins of buildings. We'd like to see digital twins of cities, and using the federated model that the Gemini principles talk about from Digital Built Britain, which is not new technology. Nothing we're asking for is the new technology. It seems to be new in the construction industry. So we're looking for them to bring in those technologies from outside. And the other area we're looking to help us to develop is manufacturing, and move away from building buildings to manufacturing buildings. That then leads us quite nicely into standardization. I don't know if Glenn talked about, we're looking at standardizing bridges. We build lots of bridges, both in Network Rail and road bridges. Wouldn't it be good if we had an archive of standard type bridges, of which we could then price up quite accurately? Because one of the problems we have with our projects is right at the beginning is being able to price them. So that becomes quite a difficult thing. So standardization and digitization would allow us to have catalogues of components which fit together in systems. Those systems then go together in assets. And what we'd like to see is a move towards the use of some of the stuff you saw Glenn showing, which is asset registers. It would allow us then, when things like the ACM cladding happen, for a touch of a button, for us to be able to look at and say, well, how many buildings in the UK are over 18 meters? Then I can go and say, well, and how many of those buildings have ACM cladding on them? And by the way, which contractors did those buildings? And, you know, what materials did they use in order to do that? You know, where did they get them from? Are there other materials which are similar? It would allow us to do that. Instead, what we had to do with the ACM was we sent people round to look at buildings. And if they weren't sure, they took samples of the buildings off and sent them back to us at MHCLG for us to say whether that was ACM cladding or not. In this world, that for me just seems incredible to believe that that's kind of where we are in construction. Before COVID happened, we had a sector deal where we put £170 million into what we call the Construction Innovation Hub, which is made up of 3 elements. It's Digital Built Britain out at Cambridge, the MTC, which is the Manufacturing Technology Centre at Anstey, which is near Coventry, and BRE. And what that was for digitization, and the Gemini principles came out of that group at Cambridge, for the use of manufacturing technology out of the MTC. And then, of course, all of this requires insurance, it requires warranties, it requires even the digitization of contracting and all the rest of it. Some quite difficult work that needs to be done. And so BRE are leading on that for us. And there's 170 million that's been put away for that. That was all before COVID came along. COVID came along, and in some ways, it's meant that people have to plan better in order for people on site, because everybody now on site, we need to know who they are, where they are, what they're doing, and you think that would be a requisite for a site to know what they're doing and where they are. But we find that in actual fact, the planning on site is not as high level as we'd like it to be. So again, there's a whole new area now of digital planning, of actually being able to say, this is the work that we are completing this week. These are the supplies that I need to complete that work. Those are the people I'll need in to do it. And this is when it has to complete for the next people to come in and do their bit of work. We've always wanted that to happen, and new tools are being developed by a variety of people looking at the digitization of the work. But again, manufacturing has done that all the time. I live in Oxford, the Cowley Works, which is where the Mini is built. I mean, it is phenomenally planned out. All the logistics come to the person, and they don't even know what car they're building. They just get given the parts, and the car that comes off is the elements of the bits that they've been given in order to produce it. And the next thing is logistics. In construction, we haven't worried about logistics because everybody turns up on site. You get a big pile of sand put in the corner. They all dump it over there. The pile of bricks over there, and some plasterboard in the other corner. And you use it as required. Normally, by the time you get to the plasterboard, of course, it's all been soaked in water because it's had a tarpaulin thrown over it. But what we're looking for is better logistics and supply. And again, digitization of this. That's
an area that's coming along so fast now, David. As someone who spends the majority of his time scanning the market and looking at new technology, the tools that are out there that are process driven and to some degree obviate the need for a CPM schedule around logistics are just phenomenal. We've got a presentation from Sublano on August 13th, and I think they're one of the leaders in that area. Hope you don't mind me interjecting. Is that okay?
No, of course not.
Hey, one of the things you said that I was most interested in was when you were talking about standardized bridges and standardized buildings. And do you think that's one of the keys to China's success with infrastructure?
I think it is. Well, it's not just China. If you look to Scandinavian countries as well, they have a lot more standardization than we do. We kind of think that standardization leads to some kind of Soviet style concrete blocks that will just be put along everywhere. But if you were to go and look at Ilke homes, for instance, or look at some of the buildings that Mace are putting up, high-rise buildings, there's an awful lot of standardization. It's got a bad name at the moment, if I'm honest, Phil. And we have to get rid of that poor quality that in actual fact, you know, for me, if you're building something in a factory, you can build it to tolerance of a couple of millimeters. When you're building on site, it tends to be to a tolerance of half a house brick.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the idea of moving to a factory means that we would get better. We'd be able to test the units and authorize not just the individual components, but the subsectors, the systems, and hopefully the overall building would be kite marked in order to say that that's an acceptable level. We're doing that in schools. We're on the 5th generation schools under Mark Green and the EF Education and Funding Agency, but not enough. Not enough people are taking it up. You may be aware that Lang O'Rourke set up a factory once upon a time on the back of Building Schools for the Future, and they were losing 200 million a year on that factory because you have to change the way that you plan. And you have to, if you own a factory, you have to run it 24/7, and you have to have a constant demand. You can't have 4 items today and then 104 the next day and then 3 the next day. So you need to smooth out your demand. So this whole world of moving, I don't think the technology is the barrier, Phil. I think the mindset and the behaviors in the construction industry are the barrier.
Yeah,
where we've always done these things that way.
I couldn't agree more. And that's one of the reasons I've launched this initiative, is to give a home to those who want to try new technologies, those who say within their organizations, there's got to be a better way. Let's have a go. Let's pilot something new, because the chance of it working greatly outweighs the risk of it not. I want to address the audience now, the 80 of you out there. Does anyone have a question for David? We can turn your mic live and you can put it right to him. I believe that there's a Julian Hardy that has one, actually. Let me just read out Julian's question. Julie's with Eric, by the way. Julian, will the government review the procurement rules post-Brexit to enable and enhance collaboration?
So I could come straight back on that. So we already have. We have a framework. Crown Commercial Services have set up frameworks, moving towards a framework model. We've always been able to do that. The construction industry itself is not the best at collaborating with itself. However, since COVID, the CLC have got together and the industry is starting to speak with one voice through the CLC. So when people say that government procurement is a barrier, that's not necessarily true. We're back to the training of individual people. In some cases, the interpretation of those procurement rules sometimes are more onerous than the rules themselves. But the government commercial function has been brought in. We've been upskilling government. We've been bringing people in from industry. People like myself, I was brought in by John Manzoni, as you say, nearly 6 years ago, to upskill government in buying. And we are looking at what we can put in contractual terms. But what I don't want is a blank sheet of paper, Phil. What I don't want people to say is, what outcomes you want from that school? Because I know what the outcomes I want from that school are. What I want is to design once and build many, which is what we do with cars.
Have you seen these advances with iterative design now, where mathematical formulas are used to do slight tweaks to building structures? Really fascinating stuff. And Stoa bought a company that did this called Opus View. And I think the company's Matter Lab that's doing that now.
To be honest, we know what we need from a school. I know what I need from a school now. I know what a school is and what a class, because basically it's a classroom. The idea is a school is there to educate our children, not to be symbols to the architect and the governors of the school. So what we're looking at is, in the same way that we do with cars, that once you get something that works, why would you not replicate that? Why should a school in Huddersfield be any different on the inside to a school in Halifax or Hammersmith?
I've got another question for you. Can I read it out?
Yep.
It says, and this one's gotten 4 votes, right? So 4 of the other people watching have said, you've got to ask Dave this question. And it's from an anonymous attendee. I don't know who that person is. Stuart, can you open his mic, please? The question reads, the only way to change the overall engineering and construction industry towards a more digital and higher project control performance is to start to include these requirements in the works information contractual package. What we see at the moment is not enough. Public clients need to stress this topic. Otherwise, everything will remain the same with very small progress on personal agendas.
And I think that's I think that's true. And we are now in the same way that we mandated, if you remember, BIM level 2, that we said that all government projects would have BIM level 2, and that was a mandation done under Francis Moore. We are looking at coming up. I don't know if you've seen governments done what they call an outsourcing playbook because of the failures of outsourcing with the demise of Carillion. So there is going to be a construction playbook whereby we will start to demand some of this new technology in there.
Is that coming out of the IPA, or is that a different body?
It's coming, well, actually for the first time, it's across all government. So basically it will be developed with Crown Commercial Services and the Office of the Commercial Function, the IPA and Treasury, because if you don't get Treasury behind you, they're the ones with the money. So we always need to bring Treasury with us whatever we do. But we will start to demand, and Nick Smallwood, who's now the new chief executive of the IPA, came from Shell, is quite adamant that we will start demanding these things in our projects when we go to bid.
The person here who posed that question, anonymous attendee, is your mic open, and was that a satisfactory response, please?
I don't feel it, Stuart. I don't think you can, we won't know who that is because by definition they're anonymous. So we're never going to know.
We can't turn that mic on, huh? We're going to turn off that feature next time. David, do you have any concluding remarks or messages for this group of rebels who like to try new technology or develop it?
So, I mean, I do. One of the things is don't forget net zero, climate change. Whilst we're concentrating, we're getting over COVID, and Brexit is still on the horizon, but behind that is climate change. So whatever we do, we have to keep in mind what buildings should do for both embedded carbon and operational carbon. And we have our mantra going forward is standardize, digitize, and harmonize. That's what we're looking to do. And we are COVID and a new government under Boris Johnson with a majority has given us much more teeth to be able to push this agenda.
Well, thank you. That's great. Thank you for joining us. I applaud your work. It's great what the government's doing, and thank you. I hope you stick around for the rest of the event.